The story I want to share with you today takes place in the small town of Millbrook, Alabama. Millbrook is a quiet suburb located about 10 miles north of Montgomery. The population of approximately 15,000 people. Our story unfolds in this peaceful community, where a series of events will shock the entire nation and leave an indelible mark on the history of I'm an American. The main character of the story is Sarah Johnson, born on January 18th, 1971. When the story takes place, she was only 17 years old and a student at Millbrook High School. She had a cheerful personality and a sweet appearance, loved by other students in the school. Her father was a business manager at a canning factory, and her mother was a housewife. In addition to her parents, she had an older brother and a younger brother. The financial situation of the family was not affluent, with the economy mainly relying on her father. To lessen the burden on her father, Sarah decided to work after graduating from high school. In addition to her studies, she also worked as a sales clerk at a household goods store or packed at a plastic factory to support her family. As graduation approached, she applied for an interview at a company and successfully passed the selection test. After graduation, she could start working at the company. This seemed to be a new chapter in her life. However, no one could have imagined that one day, on her way home after a part-time job, she would encounter a demon. What happened afterward would cause anyone who heard it to feel heartbroken. So what happened that day? Next, we will go back in time to November 25th, 1988. November 25th, 1988. It was a beautiful Friday. As usual, after school, Sarah went to work part-time at a plastic factory. At 8:20 p.m., Sarah finished work and started heading home. She got on her bicycle and pedaled toward home. There were only a few streetlights on the road and hardly any pedestrians. Suddenly, a stranger on a motorcycle came rushing from behind and kicked her hard, causing both her and the bicycle to fall to the ground. Before she could react, the man on the motorcycle quickly fled. As she was trying to get up, a young man approached to help and said that the man earlier was from the underworld and was stalking her. He also added that the man might come back to harm her, which was very dangerous, and he could escort her home to ensure her safety. Sarah, who had just fallen and was still dazed, didn't understand what had happened, but felt that the young man in front of her was a good person. So, she led her bicycle and walked with him. After walking for a while to a secluded place with no passers-by, he stopped and told her that he was also a member of a local gang and that the man on the motorcycle earlier was his accomplice. His name was Michael Harris, 18 years old, currently not attending school. He then assaulted her and said that if she agreed to stay with him overnight, he would let her go. If not, he would die. Finally, out of fear, Sarah agreed to his request. At 9:50 p.m., Michael took her to a nearby hotel and assaulted her. However, after that, he did not keep his promise to let her go home. Instead, a more sinister idea formed in his mind. He called 3 other accomplices to meet him at a nearby park. These 3 people were David Johnson, Brian Thompson, and Chris Walker, who had kicked Sarah off her bicycle. At 3 a.m., the 3 young men drove to Prattville City Park and waited. Not long after, Michael brought Sarah to meet them. All 4 of them searched her handbag and found a diary with her home address in it. All 4 threatened that they would go to her home on Main Street and kill her entire family if she dared to escape. Sarah was terrified, thinking that they could really do it, so she obediently followed their orders. After a discussion, the group of 4 decided to take her to Brian's house in the suburban hills area of Millbrook. Brian's house was a 2-story home. The house had an electric gate, and he often brought friends over. Through the phone, Sarah's parents did not notice anything unusual. They thought their daughter was at a friend's house, though they didn't report to the police. 2 days later, on November 28th, these 4 people got bored and wanted to find something more fun, so they called 2 other friends to come over to join the party. Because the noise on the second floor was too loud, it attracted the attention of Brian's father, who had just returned from a trip. When asked, Brian said that Sarah was his new girlfriend and asked his father not to disturb her. After that, all 6 continued to rape her. Out of fear, Sarah tried to endure, which made the group of 6 very satisfied. In the following days, Sarah was continuously used for their amusement. One day, when Brian's mother went upstairs to clean the room, she accidentally saw Sarah there. She knew that her son had brought girls home before, but did not expect this girl was still there. So she asked Sarah to quickly go home. However, a few days later, she still saw Sarah on the second floor, so she again asked her to go home. After that, she just ignored it and didn't ask her son any more questions. By then, it was already December. The weather outside was very cold. 4 young men often gathered at Brian's house to have fun. They even forced Sarah to strip naked and dance to the music. They even made her stand naked on the second-floor balcony until she fainted in the cold. In the following time, Sarah continuously had to endure excessive demands that were indescribable. To prevent her parents from reporting to the police, Michael occasionally asked her to call home so that her parents would not worry. They saw that she was obedient and very submissive, so they tortured her even more. When they got tired, one of the 4 would stay behind to take care of Sarah, while the others went out to get food and bring it back, continue having fun with her. Michael even used a camera to record those moments and forced Sarah to watch them. One day, Michael suddenly told Sarah that her father had died in a traffic accident. Seeing her sadness, he said it was just a joke. The group continued to use similar words to torment her mentally. During that time, one member of the group intended to find a way to release her, but was caught and warned by the group. After that, the group continued to have fun with her. By then, Sarah could no longer endure it and cried for help. Brian's parents downstairs heard the noise, but did not intervene because they were afraid of the young men. On December 7, 1988, 13th day of captivity, 6 men, after waking up in the morning, decided to do something even more horrific. They decided to kill Sarah. Around 8:30 a.m., they drove her to a secluded forest near Millbrook. They forced her to get out of the car and walk deep into the woods. Sarah, sensing the danger, started to beg for mercy. None of them listened. They forced her to lie on the ground, and then one by one, they attacked her brutally with a wooden stick. After that, they used a knife to stab her multiple times. To ensure she was dead, they tied her hands and feet and then threw her body into a river nearby. After that, they quickly left the scene. They felt relieved, thinking that no one would ever find out what they had done. However, 2 days later, fishermen found Sarah's body floating in the river. The police were immediately notified and launched an investigation. After a thorough investigation, the police were able to identify the 6 perpetrators: Michael Harris, David Johnson, Brian Thompson, and Chris Walker were arrested and charged with murder. During the trial, the brutal and inhumane acts they had committed shocked the entire nation. The trial lasted for several months, and in the end, all 4 were found guilty and sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of bail. This case became one of the most notorious crimes in the history of Millbrook, Alabama. Suspect David Johnson, 17 years old. He was a junior to Michael. His father was a shipping worker, and his mother worked in a hotel. His parents divorced when he was in 3rd grade. After that, he lived with his mother. During high school, he met Michael and quickly dropped out to join the organization that Michael had founded. Suspect Brian Thompson, 16 years old. His father was the administrative director of a hospital, and his mother was a nurse. Parents often quarreled. After each argument, his father would take out his anger on Brian and his older brother. Growing up in such an environment, his personality became increasingly irritable. He often attacked other students. One day, his brother's motorcycle was stolen. To retrieve the bike, he asked Michael for help. Two gradually became close friends. Sometimes, to avoid being beaten by his father, would invite Michael's gang to stay over. Brian's father was very annoyed by the group, but didn't dare to do anything about it. Over time, his father also started ignoring Brian. His mother was also helpless and didn't intervene much. Suspect Chris Walker, 17 years old. His parents divorced when he was young. He lived with his mother and older sister. His mother worked in a beauty salon and was often very busy with work. After entering high school, Michael pursued Chris's sister. That's how the two got to know each other. Crimes they committed should be punished according to adult standards. This was a heinous and unprecedented crime in the history of Alabama. The motivation behind the defendant's actions was extremely cruel toward the victim. Sarah endured abuses that are unimaginable to a normal person. During the trial, 4 defendants pleaded guilty, but their defense attorneys argued that the 4 were minors and did not intend to kill Sarah. They claimed they only continued to assault her, not with the intention of killing her. On May 21st, 1990, after a 10-month-long trial, the case concluded. Michael was sentenced to 17 years in prison. David Johnson was sentenced to 5 to 10 years in prison. Brian Thompson was sentenced to 4 to 6 years in prison. Chris Walker was sentenced to 3 to 4 years in prison. 3 of the remaining 7 accomplices were also detained in juvenile detention facility. Prosecution did not accept this sentence and argued that it was too lenient. They then appealed to the Alabama Supreme Court. On July 12, 1990, a year later, the Alabama Supreme Court issued a ruling. Except for David Johnson, whose original sentence remained, sentences of the other 3 were increased. Michael was sentenced to 20 years in prison. Brian was sentenced to 5 to 9 years in prison. Chris was sentenced to 5 to 7 years in prison. However, the prosecution was still not satisfied with this ruling. The Alabama Supreme Court explained that according to state law at the time, the offenders in this case were all minors, so they were subject to leniency. After the sentencing, the parents of the 4 minor defendants hoped that they and their children would be allowed to apologize and kneel before Sarah's family, hoping for a chance at redemption, but they were refused. Under the order of the civil court, Michael's mother sold the family home to raise $50 million, about 1.2 billion VNDs at current prices, to compensate Sarah's family. A lawyer, David Johnson's father, deposited a large portion of his income into a bank account managed by a lawyer. Brian's parents were aware of the incident but were not prosecuted. Sarah's family was not satisfied with this, so they filed a civil lawsuit against Brian's parents, and they were also held liable for compensation. In 1995, Chris, one of the 4, was released after serving his sentence. Due to frequent bullying in prison, he developed a fear of others. After his release, he became timid and only stayed at home. In 1997, Brian was released after serving his sentence. He left Millbrook with his family, but was unable to find a job. In August 2018, he was rearrested, causing injury, and was sentenced to 18 months in prison. In 1999, David Johnson was released after serving his sentence. After his release, he changed his name to Joji Saku and married a woman shortly afterward. In 2003, he was arrested again by the police for another crime and sentenced to 4 years in prison. In 2009, Michael was paroled and changed his name to Michael Yokoyama. After being released from prison in 2013, he was rearrested for fraud. This is one of the most notorious juvenile crimes in Alabama's history. The 4 offenders committed the crime when they were minors. After being released from prison, they reoffended. Even before being sentenced, they swore they would never commit another crime. Parents of the 4 minors expressed deep remorse after the case was concluded. They claimed that they had not properly educated their children, leading to such a severe crime. Some of them even wanted to move away from Millbrook, Alabama, to start a new life in another place. However, the stigma and the burden of their children's crimes followed them wherever they went. After the incident, the Millbrook community was shaken to its core. People who knew Sarah and her family were devastated by the tragedy. The local schools also began implementing stricter security measures and more thorough background checks on students to prevent such a tragedy from occurring again. Sarah's family continued to live in Millbrook with great difficulty. The pain of losing their daughter in such a horrific manner left deep scarred. They became more withdrawn and avoided interacting with the community as much as possible. Over time, the story of Sarah Johnson became a cautionary tale in the town of Millbrook. It was used in schools to educate students about the dangers of falling into bad company and the severe consequences of criminal behavior. Millbrook never fully recovered from the tragedy, but it did teach the community valuable lessons about the importance of vigilance, proper parenting, and the impact of one's actions on others. In the following years, the story of Sarah Johnson became a symbol of the need for reform in the juvenile justice system. Legal experts, activists, and lawmakers used the case as a powerful example of why the system needed to be re-examined, especially concerning how minors who commit serious crimes are treated. Discussions centered around whether the punishments for such crimes were too lenient and whether the legal system provided enough support for the rehabilitation of young offenders. Some argued that harsher penalties were necessary to deter others from committing similar acts, while others believed that rehabilitation and education should be the focus, given the age of the perpetrator. The debates led to changes in the law, not just in Alabama, but also in other states across the country. Reforms were introduced that aimed to strike a balance between holding young offenders accountable and providing them with opportunities to reform their behavior and reintegrate into society. Meanwhile, Sarah's family, despite their grief, became advocates for change. They worked tirelessly to raise awareness about the issues surrounding juvenile crime and the importance of community involvement in preventing such tragedies. They established a foundation in Sarah's name, which aimed to support victims of violent crime and promote education and counseling for at-risk youth. The foundation also worked closely with schools, offering programs that taught students about the consequences of violence and the importance of making positive choices. Sarah's parents spoke at numerous events, sharing their story in the hope that it would prevent other families from experiencing the same pain. Over time, the foundation became a beacon of hope for many in the community and beyond. It provided resources and support to those who needed it most, and served as a reminder that even in the darkest of times, positive change could emerge. Sarah's legacy continued to inspire many, ensuring that her life, though tragically cut short, would have a lasting impact on society.